Hello, attendees, and welcome to the 10 a.m. session about next generation AI with MIT Media Lab professor Sandy Pentland. Welcome, Sandy, and thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Do you want me to take off and do things?
Yes, please go ahead. The virtual floor is yours.
Okay, good. So I was asked to talk about the future of AI, which is something I actually maybe know something about because I've been doing AI stuff since a long time ago with some of the people that were doing neural nets, Marvin Minsky, people like that. Um, and currently, I run a research group at MIT that's fairly good size. It's in the 30 to 40 range, and it's sponsored by large banks, various countries. I help them with their policy. Large companies like MasterCard, Intuit, Swisscom, IBM, and a whole variety of other sorts of companies. So I get to see things from around the world in a somewhat unusual way. Um, and this has, over the years, led me to run discussions at Davos, which turned out to be the motivation and seed for GDPR and CPP, which you can blame me for or thank me for, depending on your attitude. I'm on the board of the Sustainable Development Goals, data AI parts, helping to write those. And I do quite a bit in the World Economic Forum, which is interesting to see. So this is what I do at the forum. We have this big dome that the Tatas put up, and together with Forbes family, we run this big all-day event. It's the second biggest event at Davos, where people come and talk about the future of technology and how it's going to affect society. And it's all online, the 2021 Imagination in Action, all one word, .xyz. Couldn't get a better URL, but there it is. It's pretty interesting to see. And the reason is even though this is just before the coronavirus, um, what people are doing is they're taking the things that they were talked about here and implementing them at hyperspeed. So it's actually very instructive to sort of see. The conclusion, if you had to sort of have a really top level about it, is that the next generation of AI is going to be shaped by opportunity and regulation, not by the particulars of technology. So, yes, things will come and go in technology land, but the thing that's going to really motivate them are the opportunities and regulations. So, one of the big ones is regulation. Who owns your data? So, CPP, GDPR. This is already a very hot topic, and it's converging, especially given that the head court in Europe just decided that the cooperation agreement between the US and EU was invalid, and that would mean that American companies can't process data for Europeans. Oops, but a problem. Another thing that everyone's very excited about, excited in a negative sense, is almost all the data seems to be concentrated in the hands of very few. So it's a winner take all inequality thing. How are you going to deal with that? And I think that it's fairly clear in talking to leadership. And I get to talk to a lot of the world leaders in various forums. Um, and one is that obviously digital identity and ownership rights are the first thing on the table. So GDPR, CPP, that's ownership rights. But along with that comes digital identity, actually getting that coherent. And one of the reasons that's happening, is such a push to it, is levels of cyber fraud, cyber attack are skyrocketing. And countries that have put in place a good digital identity mechanism have seen very substantial growth in GDP, and that's something people really need right now. Audit and accountability. As things become more understood about who owns what and what's asked of that, you can begin audit and hold people accountability. That is particularly accelerated by the fact that from now on, data resources are going to have to be declared on tax forms. So they are part of your equity, which means that all those guys that have data have to value it and account for it. That's a tremendous change. And of course, the criminal system. Today, it's sort of not obvious what a lot of things do. How are we going to do this? And I think the thing that's the most interesting insight is that we've been here before. In 1870, the big new banks were exploiting farmers, and they formed agricultural banks to fight back, the cross of gold, all that, the grains you might have heard of. In the 1920s, quite famously, big corporations were exploiting citizens' labor, so they formed local associations, which evolved into labor unions, and they pushed back. And I think the same thing is going to happen here, and in fact, I see that happening. So instead of labor unions, you're going to have data unions. Things that don't own people's data, they hold the data for people, and they exercise the data for the people that deposit with them. So it's a different mindset. It's not they own your data at all. They're working for you. Typically, they might be not for profit or something like that. And what I'm seeing is I'm seeing many of the unions in the world, the labor unions and the consumer unions, uh, uh, getting this hat on and moving at it at high speed. You might say, oh, yeah, okay. But I also see a lot of the really big investment funds moving in this direction because they think that this sort of data driven investment, where you need to have data from individuals that's very difficult and probably illegal to get, um, will be the way forward for making good investments. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. The technical core of this is that you don't make data lakes. If you have a data lake, you should be shot. 70% of all breaches come from people screwing up, leaving the back door open. The military figured this out in about 1500. You don't put all your resources in one place. You have defense in depth. What that means is you send questions to databases. The databases can be owned by different people. That transforms a lot of the cost structure. It looks like that might be inefficient from a computer point of view, but it's really not. But from a legal point of view, now you can have a contract that says, I will do X and ask you Y questions only, and lawyers will get out of your way. Price can be fixed pretty dramatically. Whereas if you say, give me your data, you're in for 6 months or a year of negotiation, and it will likely fail. So it's transformative, and we're beginning to see this being deployed everywhere. We just helped Fidelity spin up something like this. It's called Akoya. Eurostat, the official statistics in Europe, we're helping them. IBM, under the label of edge computing. DSpark is out of Temasek, the big investment in South Asia, is that sort of a data broker. This is what's happening. One of the things that goes along with this sort of distributed data is you need to have federated learning, learning that learns across multiple different databases by asking questions and then combining the answers. And you'd like those questions and answering to be secure and private, so differentially private federated learning, and we have a paper that's getting a lot of excitement about this. The importance of this is that you can learn from data that you don't own and can't see. So you can't see any individual level data. There's no privacy concerns. There's no jurisdictional, you can't move the data out of the country concerns. And you can do this even if the data is partially corrupted and still get near optimal estimates. That's pretty amazing. You should think about that. It's really different than the AI you see today. You can even do something that's pretty amazing. So for instance, some years ago, we came up with a way of doing that on encrypted data. So not only do you not see the data is never decrypted. You do analysis on encrypted data and you're looking for patterns across the data. And this is just a simple example of detecting criminal networks in blockchain, and works like a champ. It's very efficient. I should mention that several countries' military arms are using this to be able to look at cyber attack of various sorts. You might take a look at it, endor.com. The other thing that's going to drive stuff is opportunity, building a better life, building a new economy. We've just destroyed a lot of the economy. We're going to have to rebuild it. That's huge. So that comes across in several ways. So a spinoff of my lab, Ginger.io, just added 2 million more lives to their platform for mental health. One that spun off many years ago Damagi.com just hit 700 million lives under management. This is for health services. That's a tenth of all the births in the entire world. Pretty amazing. You probably never heard of it. Another thing that's generating a lot of attention, of course, is digital currencies, tokenized fractional ownership, blah, blah, blah. We've heard of Libra, crash and burn. But it wasn't this technical part that crashed and burned, it was the governance. Nobody trusted the governance. Well, guess what? The new big guy on the block is China. It's very much like Libra, digital currency now backed by the Chinese government and all of their big banks. And soon you're going to see commerce throughout the sort of Indian Ocean area, Africa, South Asia, all denominated in a digital currency that comes out of China. You should think about that because that means the dollar won't be the only big reserve currency in that part of the world. It may not even be the major currency. We have our own version of this called TradeCoin, and we've worked with Intuit, Swisscom, to be able to spin up versions of this for various sorts of special purposes. So it's not just, smoke and dreams. The Intuit thing is actually operational for a year now, has many millions of users, tens of millions of users. But you don't know about it because they don't like to call it that, right? Interactive learning, AI guided learning. So we have another spin-off here. I'll just sort of highlight it. It's using AI to make discussions more productive. We were able to use that for the government of Canada to help them get small businesses, plumbers, contractors, into AI. So we ran a course that mediated the conversation and the participation of the small businesses, and 15% of them ended up starting new initiatives. That's huge to be able to get your economy over to the AI footing. Even your plumbers are on board. Pretty amazing. One of the other things that we're able to do is analyze patterns of interaction and dominance and actually get women equal airtime. Not in an obnoxious way, but little nudges that end up giving them the sort of floor and visibility that you might have hoped that they would have. The one that is perhaps even more important is building neighborhoods. So in an age of inequality, you have to say, what do we do with poor neighborhoods? And that's worse now than ever because of the coronavirus and the lockdown. And what we've done is we've developed data-guided ways for predicting what changes to the neighborhood will result in greater GDP and greater wage growth. And the predictors we have are stronger than all of the traditional ones by a lot. So for instance, we can predict future sales for stores that don't exist. We can tell you, if you put this sort of store there, you will get these sorts of sales. And it counts for about half of the variance. It's as good, our predictions are as good as stores that actually have been there for a while and have year-on-year sales. So it's pretty amazing. There's the URL for that. A final thing is access to justice. So in many things, the law costs, the lawyers negotiating is the biggest cost, the biggest friction. And law schools understand that, and they're beginning to get with the program. So they're beginning to get to the notion that law can be computerized, it can be computational. Now that's obviously a little scary, with robot overlords. So what they're doing is they're beginning to work out how do you do computational law and keep it human. And so we just spun up the first computational law journal called Computational Law Report. It's at law.mit.edu. Go over, take a look, see what the lawyers are thinking about. And the final thing is a lot of what I just talked about is in a new book that I just released. It's free online, coronavirus special, MIT Press, called Building the New Economy. Please go take a look. Hope you find it interesting. A lot of other people already have. So let me just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. That was, so much thought-provoking stuff about a world that we're all a part of already. So thank you for that overview.
Okay. Well, you wanted 15 minutes. You got 15 minutes. Okay.
Perfect, because
I
we've
don't know if
got
you have
questions.
any questions. Typically, what happens is people are a little shell shocked, and so it takes them a
I,
little while
I
to.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit at that stage, but luckily the audience is coming through with
Oh,
very
good.
thought-provoking
Good.
questions
Because
already.
that's the fun
So,
part for me, right?
yeah. Okay, so this one just came in. Super excited about it. So, given the rise of conspiracy theorists doubting publicly available data, how do we engender trust in federal data institutions if users can't see the data?
Well, so that's where things like open data come in. So, for instance, despite a little bit of squabbles about things, census data is generally pretty well relied on. People don't really debate it. That many people live in that place. That's the economic outcome and average wage and things. And so if you have something that is public, can be verified by regular people, they can see their neighborhood, then people actually tend to trust it. For instance, if you go to inequality.media.mit.edu, you can see store by store for almost all of the metropolitan areas in the United States the level of inequality. Who goes to this store? And you can look, see your local neighborhood, you can walk there, you do walk there, and it makes you aware of the behaviors that lead to inequality. And so what we're beginning to do now is make this available to high school kids so that they can think about their neighborhood. And it's this combination of human scale, something that you can check, something you can talk about, having it open, uh, that builds trust in things.
Absolutely. So it sounds like it's a sort of just more familiarity with this kind of information and building a new culture where data is really part of the fabric of communities.
That's really key. That's why it's high school students, is because people have to be data literate. They have to understand what it means, how to think about it. But another element is that you can check it in your daily life, right? You can look around you and say, yeah, that looks about right. That neighborhood's this way, this neighborhood's that way. I see how that's happening. So you have to be able to relate it to your life. Otherwise, it's like, well, these are some numbers. I don't know exactly what that means. Why
I
should I
love that.
trust it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've recently moved to a new city myself, so I'll definitely be checking that out. Now, we've got another question. So you mentioned this really great notion of being able to train data that you don't own or that you don't even see. So how would you convince rare disease data silo owners, for instance, hospitals or pharmaceutical companies, to participate in these distributed research that uses these techniques?
Um, I don't know how much I can say about it. You're familiar with the notion of private equity, of course. Um, so what you have is you have a lot of holders of data like that, where these data are essentially stranded dead assets that incidentally you now have to declare on your tax forms. Um, if you could somehow put them together, you could maybe make some real progress. Okay, so what you'd have to be able to do, but no one wants to share the data because the moment you share it, you lose it, right? It gets spread, people do things with it. But with federated learning, you can make a legal contract that says we'll ask these questions of these databases, and the ownership rights and the answers are thus and so. That's really interesting because what that lets you do is monetize stranded assets and be able to aggregate data across silos that currently you can't reach.
Makes sense. Now,
You have to
so
think about that one a little bit. But there's a lot of things like that, and they're not all rare. Some of the biggest diseases that we face fall into this sort of category where nobody, no one company, no one hospital has the answer. But if you could put them all together, you could transform public health.
right, and there's a hope that now more than ever we'd be able to leverage all of, it's a
Yeah.
pandemic. This would be a great time to
It would
employ
have
this kind
been
of
really
strategy.
good to be able to have all these hospitals do that sort of federated learning, and we just didn't have our act together. We'd be a lot
Right.
further along if we could have done that.
Hopefully we'll do better in the future.
Well,
Now,
better.
now we've talked a lot about using AI to enhance efficiency, but what about actually using this new information, these new techniques to deal with these critical social issues? We've got income inequality. How do we actually step from saying, okay, we can do things better and faster, and actually applying it to stickier, messier problems.
So there's two things. One is this notion of sort of data unions. Imagine that everybody in a data in a neighborhood said, "Oh, I'm going to sign up to my local data union." What that means is that every time you do anything on the web, or if you send out legal requests for data, you store it in the union. It's not like the union owns it. It's just a place to store it, like you store your money, right? But then you could begin as a community asking questions about whether you're getting the sort of health services that the next guy gets. You can't ask that question now. They'll just say, sure, right? But if you could actually have your data shared as a community, used as a community, you can begin asking questions and causing change. And that's what people see is that owning your own data, if it's just you, is really not worth much. The money, I mean, people talk about monetizing your own data. It's stupid. I'm sorry, right? It's not that much money. What I want is I want my kids not to die. Okay? I don't don't talk to me about money. How do I do that? Well, I have no way to do that today because I can't show what the hospital is doing. I don't know what the public health system is doing. I just have only my data. But if I had the data of the people around me, if we could all get together, we could say, you're not doing the right thing for our community. And this is just like the unions 100 years ago. They said, this is not fair. The companies are not paying me enough. It's unsafe. And they banded together and they pushed back. And there the issue was around labor. 50 years earlier, the issue was around money. The sort of new banks were exploiting and taking over farms. And the farmers got together and said, we're going to finance ourselves. We'll have our own bank that we own. And now the same thing happens with data. You can have your own bank of data that's yours, right? And you use that to make your community better. I don't see any other really good way to sort of move forward in this sort of data area where data is now a means of production, like money, like labor.
Right. I'm just so fascinated by this idea of data unions. This is the first time I've heard of that phrase, and I love that you've provided this historical context to show that it's indeed not a completely new idea. I'm
No.
curious though, how are we going to make it happen? Like what can average citizens like us do to make sure that these institutions are being built and being built in the right way?
Well, I get to see lots of people that are actually doing this right now, right? So labor unions, gig worker associations, things like credit unions are licensed already to do this sort of thing. They just haven't ever done it. So ones that are associated with labor unions or with neighborhoods are beginning to think about it. It isn't something that's, a huge movement yet, but now I've seen something different. And that is some of the very large investment funds, the hundreds of billion-dollar investment funds, realize that the biggest opportunities, the place they have to invest, is in neighborhoods. They have to reconstruct society, and that's the thing that they ought to invest in. How are they going to do that? Well, they need very detailed data about what's the behaviors there so that they know what to invest in. Do you need a grocery store or do you need a clinic? It depends on the people. It's different everywhere. You can't have a uniform policy. How do you get that data? Well, if there was a data union, you could ask the data union in return for services, in return for investment. And then you end up with a cooperative thing where neighborhoods are working with big investment firms to get the investment they need and want. And that's really different, right?
Absolutely.
And I think it's
Well,
that big money coming into it that's going to make it happen in the end.
right. Yeah, Sandy, thank you so much. This was so thought provoking. It's this interesting confluence, I think, of a very global exchange and large sources of data. But then we're also, it sounds like, we need to be thinking on a local level, a community level as well.
That's right.
Um, so thank you so much. Again, we're unfortunately at the end of our time.
No, that's
Uh,
great. Thank you very much for inviting me. I hope people are interested.
yeah. And again, audience, please continue the conversation on the Slack workspace. And we've got another session starting in 5 minutes. So we will see you all there.
So just so the book, all
Okay.
three, right?
Yeah.
MIT Press, Building New Economy, right? Talks about the unions, talks about how you actually build these things, talks about law, talks about health, um, and it's free. Yay!
All right,
Check it
audience,
out.
make sure